Hey, how's it going? Today I have something exotic in my first test series. I have some Wrecka concentrates. So Wrecka is rebottled Wrecka, I guess. I don't know. One of them spelled with a W, so they're obviously different. I am gloriously ignorant of actual Malaysian juices. But from everything I've heard, they tend to involve a lot of sweetener and a whole lot of cooling, so I was interested to sort of give these a shot, see how they compared to some of the domestically available stuff. So today I have their sparkling orange, their sparkling mango, their Japanese aloe vera, and their sexy mango. So that's something to look forward to. I've noticed a lot of overlap between the first three of these flavors, so if you excuse me, I'm going to go over a lot of the same stuff over and over again. I apologize, but here is their sparkling orange. So as you may have guessed, this is an orange flavor. I do get like an artificial orange. It doesn't feel particularly realistic. It's more like a candy or even like an orange soda kind of orange. It's a decent artificial orange flavor, though. There's nothing too sharp or chemical about it. It's nice. So beyond that artificial orange flavor, there is some built-in sweetener and cooling to this flavor. The sweetener is interesting. It's definitely on the sweet side of things, I'd say. They use a pretty heavy hand with the sweetener. I got interested because there's actually a Reddit post that I'll go ahead and link to, talking about these flavors, and they were saying, and one of the users on there was saying that it didn't feel like straight sucralose, and that it turned their coils, their actual cotton pink. I didn't notice my cotton going pink, but I usually vape through this all in one day, so I have no reason to doubt that that may actually happen. I'm terrible about picking out sweetener in general. I don't use a lot of it when I mix. I will say I'm fully on board with the theory that there is something here besides just straight sucralose. It does seem to have some of that really, really aggressive sucralose sweetness, but just sort of back of the hand testing it. It's a little bit less sort of bitter like sucralose gets. If sucralose almost, when you taste it on the back of your hand, it almost is too sweet, and so it kind of overwhelms your taste buds and gets a little bit like aspirin-y. I didn't get that so much. It did taste a whole lot like Flavor's Sweetness, though, which is a stevia derivative. So while I can't tell you exactly what kind of sweetener is in here, it does seem like it's something a little bit beyond just sucralose. And again, lands on the fairly heavily sweet side of the equation. It doesn't go to the point where it's cloying, at least at fairly reasonable percentages. The cooling here is actually not nearly as icy as I would have expected from hearing people talk about Malaysian flavors. It does feel like there's some WS-23 in here, just because of the way it kind of hits. WS-23 for me, I get like a pretty intense like burst of like sharp cooling on my lips from straight WS-23, and I am getting that from these flavors. The one thing that seems different from the WS-23 that I'm at least used to is the cooling here has a little bit of a cardboard edge to it. It's definitely coming out in this orange flavor. I feel like that's more than anything else sort of the limiting factor in this concentrate. The sweetness isn't necessarily going to get me, although I think it's probably a little bit oversweet. It's that sort of cardboard edge to the cooling. In terms of the percentage of the WS-23 that they're using here, like I said, it's not overwhelmingly icy. It actually feels like at 4% of this actual concentrate, it actually feels a little bit less icy than like 0.5% of my normal like 30% dilution WS-23. So when I say cooling, it's not completely overwhelming. It's not going to blow your taste buds out of the back of your head or anything. But yeah, that cooling is bringing in some issues with this flavor. While I like that artificial orange, I feel like the cooling kind of thins out the base of this. It doesn't really have like the kind of juiciness that I'd really want. It makes the base of this a little thin and dry. And when they say sparkling, this actually does manage to do pretty good take on effervescence. I mean, you're never going to get like actual effervescence out of a vape, I guess. But the combination of that cooling and that sort of like sweeter edge to it, and actually like the soda type flavor, does give a fairly good impression of something that's carbonated, although I wouldn't, call it like an absolutely eureka moment or anything. So using this flavor, I feel like you're going to be fighting a little bit with like that thinness in the base. I suggest coming back in with something a little juicier to kind of fill that back out and fight back against that cooling a little bit. I'd look at like Favora Mango would be a good choice. Capella's Golden Pineapple, maybe even Capella's Sweet Guava or something like vaguely tropical to kind of bolster the bottom end of this. But overall, it's not a bad flavor. I would definitely use it as the base for fruit mixes. I think with that much sweetener and that much, and that cooling edge in there, you're definitely kind of locked into the fruit of the beverage mix. For this, I'd probably use it around 3%. I feel like it gets a little bit cardboardy up around 4%, so 3% is probably my sweet spot for this one. Moving right along, I have their sparkling mango flavor. This is really similar to their sparkling orange, only, with a mango in there instead. It's the same basic kind of thing. You have a sweeter, sort of artificial mango note, and then like the cooling and the sweetness and the sparkling is all pretty well identical. I do feel like this flavor is a little bit fuller and juicier than the orange, and so it fights back against that cardboard thing a little bit. So I feel like the cooling works a little bit better here. The mango flavor here is actually pretty good. It tastes a lot like a mango nectar, and I think that's primarily because of the amount of sweetener in there. You do get something that's a little bit juicier in general. It's a pretty legit mango flavor. I do get like a little bit of like a light pine-ish peel note that kind of ups the realism a little bit, but overall that sweetener kind of drags away from like a normal mango for me, and it's definitely more of like a Kern's sweetened mango nectar kind of flavor, but it's fairly accurate there. I'm running into some of the same issue here that I have with the sparkling orange in that cooling feels like it's thinning out the base a little bit. So I feel like, again, you can pretty much use this the same way you're going to use the sparkling orange. I'd add something juicier back in underneath it. Again, mostly like thicker, heavier, juicier tropical fruit to kind of fill in the bottom end of this. Overall, this is really close to like a good one-shot flavor around like 4%. I think if you wanted to go ahead and add some stuff to it to fill it out a little bit, I'd still probably be around 4% with it. But it's a really nice mango flavor. I'm not wild about the cooling. I think the sweetener's a little bit much for me, at least personally. But it's definitely interesting. So now I have their Japanese aloe vera flavor. I ordered this one fully expecting it to be some sort of like green monstrosity. I know I'm kind of partial to monstrosities, at least they're interesting. What I got is something that tastes a lot like those Japanese aloe vera drinks. It's one of those things that sounds super exotic, but really tastes more like white grapes with sort of an astringent peel. It reminds me of like seeded Moscato grapes more than anything else, where they're a little bit more jellied on the inside, and they have that sort of like thicker, astringent peel to it. Pretty spot on for those Japanese aloe drinks. The sparkling, the cooling, the sweetener, all that stuff seems, again, pretty identical to what's going on in the sparkling orange. I will say that the aloe seems even a little bit thinner than the orange, and so I'm getting more of that kind of cardboard effect out of it from the cooling. For me, that thinness is kind of bordering on dryness with this flavor, especially with the sweetener used here. So I think if you did want to fill this out and kind of stay in that Japanese aloe drink profile, I would look at white grapes. Particularly Flavora's Moscato actually does that same kind of like astringent white grape thing really well, and I could see a little bit of that being brought in to really fill out that aloe drink flavor. If you wanted to get a little bit weirder with it, you could probably bring in some Inawera cactus. Those sort of sweeter green notes would work really well here and kind of make it a more aloe-y aloe drink, if that makes any sense whatsoever. But in terms of pairings, you can look up aloe drinks. They have some pretty interesting fruit pairings there. I think green, actually, as silly as that sounds, like kiwis, melons, that kind of stuff is going to work really well with that flavor. Since it has that kind of grapey note to it, apples would be good. Pears would also be good. And I think this is exotic enough without being off-putting that you could probably work in some like greener florals like jasmine, Flavor Arts jasmine, or like Favora's hibiscus or something like that if you really wanted to run with that sort of interesting green accent. I could see it being used with teas too, like black tea especially, although if you wanted to go more floral, green tea would work well. In terms of use percentage, I'd probably go for about 4%, just because it's such a sort of thin flavor. There is quite a bit of sweetener in there, and so you're going to be kind of fighting against that. Green flavors in general and sweetener don't work particularly well together. That's why I'd mix it with something a little bit juicier. But if you're in the market for a Japanese aloe vera drink flavor, definitely pick this up. Okay, and last I have their sexy mango flavor. So this is a little bit different than the previous three. It isn't that same kind of like sparkling flavor. I feel like the cooling's dialed back just a little bit. Sweetness level is actually even a little bit higher, but I don't get that kind of like sparkling effect from it. It really tastes like a ripe, bordering on sort of overripe mango, depending on the percentage that you use it at. The base mango here is actually pretty good. It's kind of fleshy and pulpy and rich. I do feel like the cooling, even though there's less cooling, I'm still having that same kind of issue where it's sort of cutting down the richness of it a little bit. But in general, there's a pretty solid like mango base, and then those overripe notes come in, and they're strangely accurate overripe notes. So if you've ever let a mango sit around for too long, it gets kind of bready and kind of fermented, and this actually does that pretty well. Unlike Cap Sweet Mango, which has kind of almost like a swampy taste to it, like that subs in for an overripe, this actually tastes like slightly overripe tropical fruit, which is kind of disgusting, but also kind of cool in a very authentic way. I will say I ran into a really unique problem with this. This stuff smells horrible, and it's weird because it doesn't smell that bad in the bottle. But like when you mix it, I mixed it at 2 and 4%, and then another sample up at like 8%, just for laughs. It smells like Flavor West malt is in there. Like you get a really distinct sort of green malty smell to it, which is a little bit off-putting, to be honest. Like it doesn't come out to near the same degree as when you're actually vaping it. You know, when you're vaping it, it feels like a fairly well-balanced overripe note, at least at fairly lower percentages. But when you're smelling it, like even up in the RDA, you know, after you go ahead and you take your drag and then like you sit there for like a half second relishing in your vapor or whatever the fuck, you pick up a little bit of that like weird, strangely aggressive malt note. It also has kind of an atrocious room note too. But with all that said, I mean, at like 2 to 3%, it's actually a pretty good like not even overripe, but just like heavily ripe mango flavor, and I'd kind of use it for that. To be honest, like I'm not a big fan of Cap Sweet Mango, and I think this would do a lot of the same stuff without being quite as obnoxious as Cap Sweet Mango is in a mix. I'd use it very similarly, like again around 2 or 3%, as sort of a base ripe tropical fruit flavor to sort of layer other brighter tropical fruit flavors on top of. Apparently the Malaysians know their mangoes, because this is actually a pretty interesting like ripe mango flavor. It just has that weird distinct green malt smell to it, which is odd. In terms of sexiness, I don't know. I mean, is overripe sexy? Maybe it is. I'm not here to judge. So yeah, that's my quick take on some of the Wrecka flavors. I think if you're into sort of bright tropical profiles, I think they're probably a good place to look. That sparkling effect actually isn't all that bad. They're fairly concentrated again. I'm like between 2 and 4% on most of these. And they're not priced really prohibitively either. They're like $2 for a 10 milliliter from Chef's. If they strike your fancy at all, they're definitely worth experimenting with. But I hope that helps. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. I'll catch you later.